Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at the unbelievable, high stakes life of Julius Caesar. We're talking about a guy who systematically transformed a 600-year-old republic into an empire, and he did it through relentless, highly calculated risk taking. Honestly, this wasn't just a political career, it was a non-stop series of massive life or death wagers. 23. That is the end game of all those massive political bets. Exactly 23 frenzied stab wounds from his own peers on the Ides of March. It's, one of the most notorious murders in human history. But to truly understand why people feared and hated him quite enough to do this, we've got to rewind past all those pristine marble statues and look at his incredibly gritty beginnings. Part 1. Surviving Rome's Deadly Politics. Let's look at his origins, which, spoiler alert, were a far cry from the safe luxury you'd probably expect. Okay, so there's a huge contrast between the myth and the reality of his birth. You've probably heard the legend that he was cut from his mother's womb, which is actually where we get the term cesarean section, but he was born totally normally. We actually know his mother was still alive when he was 40. He was born to a broke aristocratic family, growing up in the Suburra. These were essentially Rome's dangerous, dirty, multi-story slum tenements. And his teenage years? Absolute terror. Rome was in the middle of a brutal civil war, and this emergency dictator named Sulla invents a horrifying system called proscription. It was basically a public hit list where named political opponents could legally be kicked to death in the streets for a cash reward. And guess whose name ends up on that list? Yup, teenage Julius Caesar. He literally had to go underground, hiding out in swampy backstreets, and even caught malaria trying to dodge these death squads. Eventually, family friends broker a deal to save him, but Caesar has to face the terrifying dictator in person to secure his pardon. And he does it with just unbelievable defiance. He rolls up wearing a fringed, long-sleeved tunic with his belt slung low, basically the ancient Roman equivalent of hipster fashion, completely refusing to conform to tradition. Sulla was so struck by this defiance that he made a chillingly accurate prophecy that this outrageously dressed teenager would one day bring down the very system they were trying to preserve. Part 2. Pirates, PR, and populism. That defiant streak only grew as he got older, turning a terrifying kidnapping into a total masterclass in ancient public relations. Get this. At age 25, while sailing to Rhodes, Caesar gets captured by pirates. They demand a ransom of 20 talents of silver. Caesar treats them with absolute contempt. He essentially laughs, tells him he's worth way more than that, and demands they raise the ransom to 50 talents. I mean, that is almost a ton of silver. So while his guys are frantically scrambling for a month to raise the cash, Caesar just hangs out, happily practicing his public speaking on his captors, promising them he'd see them hanged. They totally thought it was a joke. But here's the crucial point. This wasn't just youthful arrogance. It was a hyper-calculated PR stunt. The second the ransom is paid and he's released, Caesar privately funds his own fleet, sails right back to where those pirates were anchored, captures them, gets his ton of silver back, and has every single one of them crucified. He executed them purely to secure strong alpha male headlines back in Rome. Just an epic, ruthless maneuver for fame. Part 3. Buying absolute political power. Fast forward to age 32. Caesar is climbing the political ladder, but he feels like he's seriously lagging behind. Legend actually has it he saw a statue of Alexander the Great, realized Alexander had conquered half the known world by his age, and just went into absolute overdrive. But climbing the ladder in Rome took serious cash, which Caesar didn't have. So he aggressively bought his popularity. We're talking privately financing insanely lavish public games, paying out of pocket to repair the Appian Way, and widespread bribery for votes. To do all this, he plunges himself into staggering debt, mostly borrowing from Marcus Crassus, Rome's richest and most crooked property baron. And that brings us to an incredible all-or-nothing bet. The role of Pontifex Maximus, Rome's high priest, opens up. It's a highly influential lifetime appointment. Caesar is the massive underdog here, but he borrows even more money to bribe his way to the top. He literally tells his mother on election day that he's either coming back as high priest or he's going into permanent exile because of his catastrophic debts. Against all odds, the gamble pays off and he wins. Now, to build his ultimate power base and crush his conservative opponents in the Senate, he forms the triumvirate. This was a shady, behind-closed-doors alliance that perfectly balanced power. Crassus brought infinite money, Pompey the Great brought military might and veteran votes, and Caesar brought his sheer, undeniable populist appeal. Together, they completely steamrolled traditional Roman politics. It got so ridiculous that during his time as consul, which is the highest office in Rome, the public came up with a mocking joke about his ruthless tactics. See, there were supposed to be two consuls working together to balance power. Caesar's co-consul was a conservative named Bibulus, but Caesar just uses hired thugs to dump a literal bucket of dung on Bibulus's head, intimidating the guy so badly that he locked himself in his house for the rest of the year. Caesar illegally passed laws entirely by himself, leading everyone to jokingly call it the joint consulship of Julius and Caesar. Part 4. The brutal conquest of Gaul. Because he passed laws illegally, Caesar faced immediate prosecution the second his one-year term ended. To avoid trial, he secures a governorship in Gaul, modern-day France, where the ruthless politician becomes an even more ruthless general. The scope of this campaign is just staggering. He starts by blocking the migrating Helvetii tribe, and then systematically slices his way through hundreds of distinct Gaulish tribes over 5 brutal years. He's defeating Belgian forces, fighting off German tribes. But the real genius? He wrote a book called The Gallic Wars, sending it back to Rome in serialized chapters. It was basically real-time political propaganda to feed his myth and keep the public obsessed with him. But we have to talk about the horrifying human cost of all this ambition. His writings made him a hero back home, but the reality on the ground was sheer devastation. Out of roughly 12 million Gauls, Caesar himself boasted that his campaigns left 1 million dead and another million sold into slavery. Think about that. Entire cultures erased just to fund his political survival and personal vanity. And talk about a psychological flex. To teach the German tribes a lesson, he didn't just take boats across the Rhine River. No. He has his engineers build a massive, cutting-edge, 400-meter bridge in just 10 days. He marches his army across, spends 18 days burning crops and villages just to prove he could, and then retreats back to Gaul, completely destroying his own bridge behind him. It was pure, unadulterated terror and a massive showcase of Roman engineering. Part 5. A PR stunt in Britain. By the end of his 5 years, his allies are trying to extend his command to keep him safe from prosecution. But he needs a fresh, spectacular reason to justify staying in power. So he looks to the very edge of the known map. He targets Britain. You have to understand, for Romans used to the calm waters of the Mediterranean, crossing the violent, choppy English Channel to this misty, mythical island was considered as logistically terrifying as a modern moon landing. But Caesar desperately needed the PR victory. The first attempt? Near disaster. Deep-bottom boats couldn't land properly, and storms wrecked his fleet. But he's totally undaunted. He orders 800 brand-new, redesigned ships built over the winter and goes right back. He faces fierce chariot-riding guerrilla resistance all the way to the River Thames, forces a crossing, secures a nominal tax promise, and then immediately leaves. He never even set up a real occupying force. It was a totally insubstantial conquest, acting purely as a massive headline generator to keep his political career breathing. Which leaves us with one massive, lingering question. Tracking his rise from a teenager hiding in the slums to a commander reshaping the map of Europe, looking back at the millions of lives extinguished and a centuries-old republic dismantled just to fund one man's endless political campaigns and PR stunts, we really have to ask, was Julius Caesar a visionary, superhuman genius who laid the groundwork for Western civilization? Or was he simply a ruthless, vain tyrant who destroyed the world around him for his own glory? It's a question history is still trying to answer.